But we know too from the research that's done, when we have those low levels of wellbeing, we are more likely to develop a mental illness.
Yeah.
So what's key for me and what I was hoping to encourage participants in the workshop to do was really to have a look and become more aware of what are those signs, what are those early signs that they see in themselves that their levels of wellbeing might be dipping. And like Steve said before, everyone is different in what they need to support their wellbeing, but to understand what is your go-to, or, start to develop a little toolbox of those strategies that work for you.
Steve Schiller is a 2-time state pruning champion and the man behind Tractor Tread Vineyards in the Barossa. Joining him in this episode is the vivacious Rebecca Weatherill, a Coober Pedy girl with an affinity for the wine industry. Beck had a change of life direction after enduring a number of devastating events in her own life, leading her to start her resilience-based business, Workplace Wellbeing SA. Beck recently pioneered a series of wellbeing workshops for Barossa growers, bringing mental and physical health management to the forefront. Steve was one of the many growers who participated in the workshops and is an advocate for speaking up when times are tough, despite the discomfort. Here's Beck and Steve.
Welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Vines, the wellbeing podcast for growers, proudly brought to you by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia and sponsored by PIRSA. Hosted by award-winning mental health podcaster Callum McPherson and wine columnist for The Australian, Nick Ryan.
Steve, what does it take to be pruning champion?
Believe it or not, I don't actually do much pruning at all.
Really?
Maybe that's why.
So maybe I've got good hands to keep that going. Years ago, I used to do a lot of pruning on the property, but yeah, now if I prune 10 vines a year, that's probably it.
So when it comes to competition time, how have you managed to pull that out multiple times?
Just go fast.
Keep your fingers.
Are you still rocking up for those competitions? Because that was
I got knocked off last year. So
right, okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the pruning competition is very shortly, but I've got other commitments on that day. So.
Oh, really? Is that because you lost and you don't want to show your face again? Or?
It's in Clare.
Okay.
They prune different in Clare.
We're having a bit of fun with it, but these kinds of things, and I know they take it very seriously in Clare, this competition. I mean, it's just a nice way to sort of get together and get people together and celebrate.
I suppose the history of it, years ago, there was always pruning competitions, and it was always taken real serious. And there was people that wanted to get it going, probably hadn't been run for 25 years. And even when I was in primary school, we had pruning competitions there that was run, and I won on one of them too. So I've kept it going for a few years.
But it's a matter of speed, precision, and accuracy, really.
It is.
It's not just pure speed.
Yep.
I mean,
and don't double think. If you think that's what you're going to do, just go with it.
Yeah.
But you just rock up having barely pruned and then win the whole thing. Did that piss people off?
No. Never.
Tell us a bit more about your history in the industry.
So I'm 5th generation on our property, so family property. So we're running 70 hectares of vineyard just out of Tanunda Gummersaw area. Growing Shiraz, Cabernet, Mataro, Malbec, Grenache, Fiano. Selling to mainly Barossa brands. And yeah, that's about where that's at.
And who's out there on the property with you?
So mainly just me. Daughter does a little bit of work. So me and my wife run the property, Sonia. So.
And Beck, you're a Coober Pedy lass.
I am.
Can you tell us a bit about you growing up in Coober?
Yeah, I was there until I was 13, at which point I went to the Big Smoke. So that meant Alice Springs.
Right.
And I went to boarding school in Alice. But yeah, growing up in Coober Pedy was just such a different environment. And we didn't have TV, had a long drop, no inside bathroom. I had a motorbike at 11. So it was a very different environment to grow up in. And I think that it really helped develop quite high levels of resilience from a really young age.
How was having the underground dugout for a home? I've seen the photos.
Yeah, I didn't know any different. But Mum and Dad certainly appreciated it, that when they first moved up there in 1970, they lived 8 miles out of the town centre in a tin shed. and the only thing they had for cooking was a wood fire. So they
the walls and roof in summer.
Yeah, exactly. So they really appreciated it when they were able to come in to town and into a dugout.
You touched on it there, but you've had to develop a thick skin over the years. Can you touch on some of those things that you've had to build resilience off the back of?
Yeah, I think that environment certainly helped to build that. But when I was quite young, I had a tumour, some health issues, and had a tumour removed. So I spent some time in the Women's and Children's Hospital with that, some relationship breakdowns, a really tragic accident with my best friend and her 3 daughters and another little girl in 2010. And that was pretty hard to deal with. And I think that sort of led to a couple of years later experiencing what we now know as professional burnout. Even though I had all those levels of resilience, it couldn't keep me or my head above water not to experience burnout in the end.
Can you just dig a little bit deeper into going through that experience and coming out the other side of it? We're talking about people being under a lot of pressure with their day-to-day, and there might be people listening to this who perhaps aren't actually all that far from going through something similar, whether they know it or not. What was it like actually getting to that point and then having to come back from it?
Yeah. Look, this was in 2013 and the World Health Organization hadn't formally recognised burnout, and I knew that it wasn't depression and anxiety. It felt different for me, but it was certainly that absolute exhaustion on every level of exhaustion. They also identify symptoms of burnout as being quite cynical or having high levels of cynicism, which I did certainly in my professional environment.
Hardly ideal.
No, not at all. And I was in hospitality at the time. That was pretty difficult to manage. And I guess I tried to hide it as best as I could and got on with it, because that's what I grew up knowing, and that's, you just get on with things, until it reached a point where I really couldn't. And I basically had to step away from work. So I took a few months off and started to integrate some of those healthier habits into my daily life. So prioritising sleep. I had a dog, so it was daily walks with Gus the Wander dog, and some meditations and yoga and some just slowing down a little bit.
Did you sort of feel yourself slipping when you're trying to keep going and, pushing harder and harder just to sort of get through? Is there a conscious moment where you start feeling like, no, I'm actually going backwards here? Or are you does it get to a point where it just goes bang and hits you out of the blue?
I think that's a really good question. I think for me it was like feeling like the hamster wheel, and that constant, we all know what that feels like, that constant hamster wheel with no letting up.
And not getting anywhere.
Not getting anywhere. And then also, taking up some unhealthy habits. I mean, I was in the wine industry, and so, drinking or relaxing at the end of a 12-hour day meant, consuming quite a number of glasses of wine, and that interrupted my sleep, and it just exacerbates all those other things. So,
and that easily becomes the go-to coping mechanism, where it's pretty much part of the job.
Yeah.
But can creep up on you, especially if you normalise it over a lot of years, where it starts to have actually a negative impact, and you may or may not notice how it's disrupting your health. Did you end up going dry, or you just sort of started to manage it differently?
I certainly reduced my alcohol consumption back in 2013, 2014, when I first, became aware of the burnout, but not entirely. It wasn't until 2020, actually, and it was in January. And so I sort of did what the opposite of the world did, in that I had stopped drinking.
Right, when everyone started drinking.
Yeah,
even more.
So that was just a personal choice, and I just wanted to see how far I could go without putting too many, pressures on time frame and stuff. So I got to about 10 months, but that was really challenging for me because I'd come from the wine industry. And it was part of my identity. And so you go out and, I love Barterino, and I'd go into Barterino and say, hey guys, don't forget I'm not drinking. I'll just have a non-alcoholic gin or something along those lines. But can you put it in a glass so I don't look like a wanker?
And was there pushback against that, or was that more in your head that there would be, but it wasn't really a problem?
No, there was a little bit of pushback. Yeah, some of my friends.
I know we're all like, are we as switched on in our situations to people who might be struggling?
If I'm looking at it and seeing that struggle in others, I think from a work environment, I generally check in the communities that I work in, but I work for myself now, so I'm not in a daily environment with others in a normal workplace, I guess. But I certainly do keep an eye out to see if there's any sort of changes that I can visually see in somebody.
Steve, how do you go with managing your own well-being, and is that something you've become more aware of over time?
Yeah, so definitely well aware of it. There's always huge stresses in running your own business. It's have issues like hailstorms come through a few years ago, and all of a sudden in 5 minutes everything
changes.
Your income's gone, and I don't have a salary that I can jump back into. So then you probably bounce off a lot of other people in similar situations who are running their own properties and working out, asking them ideas, and it's probably working other ways of positive things that you can do in a bad situation.
And how do you go asking for help? Is that something that
I suppose
easy?
You always have key people that you go to first off that have been in. There's always been situations like that in 20 years ago or 40 years ago, and you go back on history and stuff like that. So all sorts of stuff like that.
So that's around those big events and natural disasters, which we can't help. But what about the stuff in between, just feeling the pressure and having to wear a lot of different hats and get a lot of stuff done? And
so I suppose the downturn in the wine industry at the moment and
uncertainty, that's
and when in the last few years where some of the wineries we've grown for 100 years, and all of a sudden they say they don't want your grapes, but don't take it personally, but it's pretty hard not to take it personally.
Well,
what helps you cope with some of those issues? There's a lot of stuff there that you can't necessarily control, and you've just got to roll with the punches. What helps you to be able to navigate that?
So it's trying to turn off from that, which is sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. So get off farm. I do a lot of mountain biking, so that's a good escape. Always seen in the coffee shops in the Barossa, so I can't stay on farm too long and can't keep doing the same job too long. I need to have a bit of jumping around. So connecting with people, social medias and phone calls and texts and stuff like that. So.
And Beck, you've taken your life experience and moved into another industry, started your own thing. And just tell us about what that is and how that works and how that connects with what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so I guess that experience of burnout and the fact that I could see the difference that some of those healthier choices were making in my life, and I recovered reasonably quickly. And so I was intrigued then to understand the science behind, what is it that supports our well-being and prevents burnout from happening again, really. And so then I went and studied a diploma in positive psychology and well-being, mental health first aid, and a number of other bits and pieces that I really wanted to explore the science. So I was then quite passionate in sharing that knowledge with people, especially to prevent burnout. And I was absolutely thrilled when I partnered with Barossa Australia last year, and we applied for some grant funding through Preventive Health SA. We used to be Wellbeing SA. So we were provided with some grant funding so that we could run some workshops. So we did that at the end of last year, and Steve was along to one of those workshops. So we held 3 for growers in the Barossa, and we had over 70 growers come along to those 3 workshops because we went to the region. So we had one in Ebenezer and one at Barossa and then one out the other way. So we brought all the growers together, and it was a lovely way to...
There was a big mix of age groups in it too, wasn't there?
Yeah,
which was good to see.
Yeah, I guess it sort of say with some of those older sort of people who probably for so long have just been all about, just plough on, be resilient. You're responsible for yourself and yourself alone. To see people like that
Yeah,
looking
absolutely.
for
And
advice is important.
yeah, but I was so, I guess I was so nervous because I was going into a community that I'd spent, over 20 years and I was in the wine industry. I started my wine journey at Yalumba in 1999 and I'd worked at Torbreck. And so, I knew quite a lot of the people in this group, but having to talk to growers about feelings and, awareness about how they were feeling and functioning, I've got to say I was a bit nervous at first, but we got great engagement, didn't we, Steve?
Yeah, I thought there could have been better engagement. You thought it was real good, but
But I guess
People warm up to it.
there's engagement.
people don't like
there's
sharing their feelings
engagement,
too
which
much.
is one thing, but
Yeah.
there's actually simply being there and being there with an open mind
is.
and open ears.
Yeah, but talking to people afterwards, they wouldn't say anything there, but they all got stuff out of it in different ways, which is good. So
That's
Yeah.
it. And often you might have people who don't necessarily respond on the spot, or they're not all that forthcoming in the moment, but they'll go home and think about it. And then it's about the other conversations that it sparks that's important. Or they might, end up sending a message later on, or they can at least see other people as going through some of the same things that they are. And there's a lot of impact there that perhaps you won't necessarily get back in an obvious way, but it is making a subtle difference.
I think at least knowing there is some option to explore when, things are getting tough and getting on top of you.
And that there's dozens of other people rocking up who they know for that purpose, because they're also human and they're also going through these things. And it's easy to operate in a silo and feel isolated and feel like, oh, I'm the only one who's not getting on with the job or who's really feeling this pressure. And then if you can bring people together for that specific purpose, then it shows you that, okay, you're one of many, actually. What was the concept initially with putting that together?
Oh, the concept was we went in wellbeing by stealth because we incorporated it with a CEO update. So there was Scott Hazeldine joined the Barossa Australia last year, and so it was really an opportunity for him to go out and speak to the members with an update on China and water. And then I had about 60 to 90 minutes in a workshop mode. But I use a survey tool that was developed out of the University of Melbourne. And it really is along the lines of the PERMA, which is an acronym, PERMA framework. And so I invited participants to do the survey either before or after the workshop. And I think you did that, didn't you, Steve?
I did, yep.
Yeah. And so hopefully that was able to give people a bit of an idea about the structure or those 6 pillars that contribute to wellbeing. So they just don't think it's only health, that they understand that there's some other factors that contribute
walk
to
us
wellbeing.
through what they are quickly?
Yeah, so the P stands for positive emotions, and they're those really genuine, heartfelt emotions that you experience. It's not positive affirmations at all. It's the experiences of perhaps, Steve, going for a ride on your bike, getting out of the vineyard, being in nature, whatever that might be for people. So feeling those and looking for those opportunities during your day, even if it's just to stop and maybe watch the sun rise or sunset or whatever it is that floats your boat. But yeah, looking for more positive emotions in your day. E is for engagement. So that's really about how well you are engaged in your life, in your activities. And so looking at ways to do some more of those favourite things that you enjoy doing. R stands for relationships. And we know really that relationships are the number one contributing factor to wellbeing. There's a wonderful study by the Harvard longitudinal study, so it's the longest study that's been going around, showing that it's the quality of the relationships that determines the quality of your life.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, that's a very important part of that. And so it's really good. Steve, when you were mentioning your connection, you go riding with a group and you like to get out of the vineyard and connect with others. It's just so important.
It is.
Yeah. M is for meaning, so finding meaning and purpose in what you're doing. A is for accomplishment, which is that sense of achievement at the end of a day or any sort of period. And then you've got the H, which is health, so the health factor. And I think the quickest way to really help yourself is to concentrate on your sleep. Mm-hmm. Sleep would have to be your number one go-to, I think,
it's
for
the top
health.
of the tree that everything else flows from, isn't it?
Yeah, yep.
And how'd you go with thinking about those things, Steve, doing that survey and being part of the workshops, are they things that you're conscious of most of the time?
Yeah, I'm always conscious, but if you go and actually, it's easy to say to do it, but it's making time to do it. And that's probably, Beck was talking about burnout, and I'm probably a bit coming out of it a bit with where the industry is at the moment, where you think, well, why the hell are you looking after grapes when you haven't got a sale from them? And why don't you just walk away and doing something else? So, and that can pretty easy turn into depression. So it's probably trying to keep on top of all of that.
Yeah, and it's funny, talking, through some of the earlier episodes, and some people go, to get away and to give myself, some time, just like you're talking about, go out into the vineyard. But then by the same time, I think you can go out into the vineyard and you're sort of disengaging from everything that's going on by being in the vineyard, and you can probably be stuck in your own head a little too much. So it's this sort of double-edged sword, but some people go, I like the peace and quiet of being out in the vineyard or on the tractor.
What they like.
But sometimes
I've got to escape the property, because when I'm at the property, there'll be something
it's all on top of you
that I want to do or feel like I should do, and I got pretty high standards. So when it's like, let's save money and let's let the weeds grow real high and don't care about that, but that drives me insane. So
you're better off on your bike. Somewhere else.
We'll go, got a little van, so we're always going away for weekends or nights here and there, and go and jump in the ocean and get a bit of sea breeze and sea water on you, and that totally changes your feeling too. So
what's it like for you to focus on wellbeing and mental health and come to a workshop like that and actually sit down and go through those things and think about it on that level, which you're probably not the rest of the time? Is there something that's confronting or uncomfortable about that, or is it actually...
Yeah, there's always uncomfortable levels, and got a lot of friends that have got similar issues and struggling in different ways, and so you're thinking about how you can help them, and I probably actually think more about helping friends and helping myself.
And when you're going through that survey, Beck, is there's a community aspect of that, or are people doing it individually and then coming back together?
They're doing it individually, and it was just with the survey component of the workshops, it was just an invitation. So we didn't get a huge number of respondents. So we had about 25 actually do the survey. One, it's online, so not everyone is comfortable to do a survey online, but this is a really robust survey with a fantastic tool behind it that can provide some suggestions on how to look after wellbeing. But the data behind that I saw, so out of those 25 grape growers, and I don't know from which session they were attending at all, it's all de-identified, but of those 25 responses, we saw about 60% of respondents were what I call above the line. So they had wellbeing levels sort of, above the line, which is what you want to see, even though they could be struggling. In fact, 40% of them said that they were struggling, living well despite those struggles, but we had 40% above the line. So obviously 60 above, 40 below the line.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot. But in workplaces, when I'm doing this survey, we often see those sorts of numbers below the line. But we know too from the research that's done, when we have those low levels of wellbeing, we are more likely to develop a mental illness.
Yeah.
So what's key for me, and what I was hoping to encourage participants in the workshop to do, was really to have a look and become more aware of what are those signs, what are those early signs that they see in themselves that their levels of wellbeing might be dipping. And like Steve said before, everyone is different in what they need to support their wellbeing, but to understand what is your go-to, or start to develop a little toolbox of those strategies that work for you.
And building that self-awareness, and it's not as talked about. We know sort of typical depression, maybe typical anxiety, but what you're talking about there is languishing, so that grey area in between where, things aren't terrible, but they're not great. I'm not all that excited about it. It's sort of that murky area in between where it's a bit ho-hum, and you normalise that. And if you are used to living in that space, the chances of you ending up at the bottom of the barrel is a lot higher, and you can negate that risk by jumping onto it once you're feeling, actually, hey, I've been feeling pretty average for a long time, focusing a bit more conscious awareness on how can I build myself up, even when it might be confronting, or you might not want to spend energy on that. That's going to proactively prevent you from ending up where you don't want to be if you don't face it. Because we know letting things go rather than digging them up and actually looking them in the face ultimately ends up being worse. But it's easier said than done when you know you should be addressing something, and that might involve other people, and it might involve tears or tough conversations. It's always seems easier in the moment to push it off into the distance. I think
of Darren Hanlon's song, we all cope in different ways, don't be too hard on yourself. I reckon that's a pretty good line. So
that is a great line. Yeah, I think that, that is one of those things to be aware of, those early signs of awareness. That could be irritability or whatever those earlier signs are. And then what do you do about it? Because it's just those small daily habits that will help you and start to stockpile, I guess, your internal resources. So it doesn't have to be big things, but it's just those small daily habits. So one of the things that I did in the workshop was introduce people to habit stacking. So this comes from James Clear from Atomic Habits. It comes from his work. BJ Fogg also has something on how you can habit stack. So you start to build on. If you want to bring in a new daily habit, stack it on something that you're already doing.
Right.
So, but start small. Like the key is to start small, because when you achieve that, you get this hit of dopamine, the body goes, yep, well done, and we'll want to do it again. So
give us an example of how
habit stacking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you end up doing yours, Steve, in the, we did an action plan, you probably.
Yeah, I reckon I had a little bit of Pilates to do.
Yeah, okay. So a bit of Pilates to do. And when were you going to do it?
Yes.
You're in trouble, Steve.
No, so the idea is
I've still got a voucher for a session that's 3 years old.
So
Pilates is tough.
I did do some of the class, but I didn't quite like the structure of that. And then I suppose once I'd learnt what to do, I'd done the bits at home, and that probably initially it started from back issues that I had, and that was going to help that. But yeah, it's just putting away 5-10 minutes, and sometimes it happens, and then it's like you don't do it. And
exactly. So it might be something like,
can't be too big. It's got to be little.
It's got to be exactly. You've got to start small. And it might be like, I don't know when you like to do Pilates, but maybe it's like, after I get out of bed and I have my morning coffee, as soon as I've had my coffee, I'm just going to do 10 minutes of Pilates. So it's really bringing that trigger into a trigger there to help you to remember and remind yourself to do that daily action.
And so just conditioning yourself and making it into a lifestyle. So it's not like, gets to the point ideally where it's not a conscious decision where you have to go like, I've got to make myself get up and exercise again, and you just ideally find yourself doing whatever that thing is that you're supposed to do eventually. And
it takes time.
Yeah, and it's also not about being perfect either.
It's got to be something you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
If it's always a struggle.
That's right. Yeah. And I think there's always something that people can find that's for them. I think exercise is a big one, nutrition as well, where you can get an idea of, exercise is long distance running, and I don't like doing that, so I don't like exercise. But the reality is it can be any kind of activity, whether that's playing some sort of sport or it's going to the gym.
Whenever you do any sort of exercise, you always feel better. It just
that's right. Yeah. Everyone can find something that suits them, but you don't need to push it uphill and try to enjoy something that you just don't like doing.
And you probably find that with farmers, there's a lot of farmers that say, I don't need to do anything like that because I'm active.
The job's so physical,
but it's not really that physical anymore. There's an organisation I'm involved in, Fat Farmers, which that's a mental health and physical activity too. And
tell us a bit about that.
So there's a group in the Barossa, and that's sort of just walks that we do. They also do a gym session. Gym's not really for me, but yeah, just an organised walk every month or so, and kids will tag along, and it's a bit about talking to people and just that connection.
And that connection, I think, I guess it's interesting in the Barossa. When we talk about it's an industry in tough times at the moment, and you might individually be feeling, anxious, about contracts or season or all sorts of things. But then when that anxiety is not just yours, but it's shared through the community, do you find that that is a compounding problem when you're down at the coffee shop and that's the conversation at the coffee shop is so and so's just lost a grape contract, or when you're at the pub or wherever you are, and it becomes a community-wide
It does,
concern?
and it's a bit, as hard as it is, but it's a bit dog eat dog out there at the moment, because you'll have a friend that loses a contract, but you might pick up from that winery. So yeah, there's a bit of secrecy under the hat too. People probably aren't talking too much open about it.
Yeah.
So it's coping with all.
Yeah, and I guess
all
that
stuff like that.
It is and it sort of leads me to a question to you, but you've got all this now knowledge and information from a new career. How do you filter that back through your old career to shape advice for wine people?
Yeah, so I guess I just feel so passionate about the wine industry. I have so many friends in the wine industry, and it's something that I have been extremely close to. My mum still lives in the Barossa on Bazadow Road. And so wherever I can contribute, Nick, really, it's like applying for this funding. It was an initiative that, I took on board, and I approached Barossa Australia and said, come on, let's do this. And it gave me so much joy to be able to have those funds. I've Madge from WBM. I'm contributing some articles. I'm not a very good writer, Nick, so please don't judge me on my writing. But it's just
neither's Madge, so that's all right.
Please don't edit that.
We'll send that direct to him, that bit.
But I just want to share what I've learnt. And I also want to do it in a way that for people to understand struggle is a very normal part of life. Our wellbeing levels ebb and flow. But if we can just take those daily actions and look out for ourselves and others, then we can make a real difference. And wellbeing doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It shouldn't be cost prohibitive. It's really about looking after ourselves. And that's what we just need to be doing a lot more of that.
Yeah, and it's not a nice to have add-on extra either. It's essential, and it's core to who we are as human beings, whether we like it or not. How we're going needs to be kept in check. And if you don't want to put the effort into it or acknowledge it, that's fine, but you're not going to get away with it in the long term. And also I think making it simple for people, making it so people can understand that there's nothing to be embarrassed about, or they don't have to go and do anything spectacularly different, but just be aware about daily habits and things they can do better, and why they should, for their bottom line. You're going to have a better business, you're going to have a better family, you're going to be happier with yourself if you're conscious of these things and actually rocking up and doing the hard thing in the moment. Sometimes it's going to pay off in the long run. How receptive have you found people have been so far in talking about some of these things?
Some will hardly say anything. Probably the ones who open up the most handle it the best on occasions, but then they can also fall over in the background when no one's watching them. So it's just working out ways to calm yourself down a bit when it's when you can feel something's triggering you.
Keep an eye on people and help where we can. I guess we've got to accept that everyone's going to be acting differently. There's no universal set of standard signals. Everyone's got their own.
Yeah, and it's from day to day, and where you can be doing this one day and it won't worry, and the next day it'll drive you crazy and flick you off, and you're just having things that's, I don't know, something in your mind that you can calm you down. I think sometimes like a pelican coming into land, you think they're such a big bird and they should be out of control, yet they're so graceful when they come down, and little things like that sometimes that you run through your mind.
Yeah. Haven't heard that one before.
I like that. But I think, sorry.
No, you go first.
I was just going to say, in answer to your question, Callum, the feedback that I got after the workshops from people, we needed to obviously do an evaluation piece back to funding provider, but a lot of the feedback I received was that, the way I presented, I guess, was relatable for people. I mean, I have been in the industry for 20 years. I have experienced myself. And so I'm hoping that the approach that I have, which is quite down to earth and just talking to people as I would normally, is hopefully a relatable way, and that message does.
What are some of the conversations that you've had, bar the feedback, but the more qualitative, just talking to people? What are they saying about what they're going through and what potentially helps them? Is there some stuff that sticks out?
Yeah, if I can share a quick little story,
Absolutely.
it's sort of a little bit away from the work that I did with Barossa Australia, but I've also just recently done a piece with a homelessness alliance. So it's organisations, NGOs coming together to work towards homelessness. And I've just done a wellbeing program with them. And the woman I've been working with internally shared a story the other day to say that, you know, there was somebody at work who had been with the organisation for 10 years, was experiencing burnout herself, and had actually come to the person had approached the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program that they have in place, but it wasn't as helpful as she needed. So they devised a plan where she actually was able to tap into her long service leave. She actually took 3 weeks and was able to seek the help that she wanted. Now that resolved or I guess stopped a situation from happening at work where she may have gone on a stress-related compensation claim. Now, if she had done that in the workplace, they would have had to keep her position open as far on top of, obviously, an awful situation for her and her family. It would have put a whole lot more pressure on the team around her as well as costing the business money. So when I could hear something that as impact the outcome of the work that we've just done, that this woman was able to get the help that she's needed, that she's recovered and feeling better for her family, for me that's just a win-win, and I get quite emotional hearing those stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You used a phrase earlier that I've actually never heard before, mental first aid. Define mental first aid for me.
Yeah, so mental first aid, you can become accredited in mental health first aid as you can in normal first aid. And it's definitely one of the recommendations that I have for any organisation that I work with, that they have some representatives who have done mental health first aid training.
Yeah. Is some of that happening in the Barossa?
Yeah, it is. It's great. And so I think they've had one lot of training maybe last year. Did you do that, Steve? No, they've got some coming up though, because I also did some workshops with about 15 wine companies earlier this year as part of this grant funding as well. So it was with growers, but also with wine companies. And I had some lovely feedback from them that they were sending their people off for mental health first aid training. So it teaches you an acronym called ALGIE and some symptoms, understanding what the various mental illnesses might look like, looking for change of behaviours, and more importantly, how to initiate a conversation and what to do next.
Yeah, and that's another part of it, because obviously we're talking about well-being. There's looking after yourself, knowing what you need, and then the other piece of how do you look after other people. And because everyone's different, that's not really self-explanatory and can be confronting and difficult to navigate. If you've got a sense that someone's having a tough time but they're not one to open up, and you can see things are getting worse but you can't get through to them, what do you do? And mental health first aid helps with that. What sort of advice can you offer people about how to be there for someone, how to open that door for that
I've had a really
conversation?
good mate who's been at the bottom of the barrel, and I sort of think, well, he wouldn't, and he's told me quite a few times he wouldn't be there anymore if I hadn't been there. And it was just a lot of it, daily phone calls and just checking in on him, and he still felt wanted. And it's, you just let them talk and don't really offer them too much advice. And it's just an ear a lot of the time.
And is it sometimes not even actually saying, this is why I'm calling?
That's right.
You're just calling.
Just talking about crap sometimes to get them thinking about something different. And by the end of the phone call, they're in a better frame of mind.
What's it like for you being there for a mate like that and making those calls on a daily basis and just trying to show them that there's someone there for them, not making it obvious necessarily, but doing that as a mate? Is that something that's easy to do?
Yeah, that's easy to do, but it does wear you down a little bit too at times. So it probably becomes more of a struggle for your own mental health when you're seeing like that, because you don't, you've got to
look after yourself too. That's the thing, because we can get caught up trying to look after everyone else, and if you're not doing a good enough job of looking after yourself, then you can hit a wall pretty quickly.
Like I said before, well, I look after other people, but myself, then it tends to turn off a bit for that sometimes. So you know what you're meant to do, but it doesn't quite happen.
Another part of that is not feeling like the pressure's on you to actually fix other people's problems. I think that can be a pitfall for people often is they can see things aren't going well for someone and they care about that person and they want to help them and they say, you got to do this, or often the first step of you got to go seek out a professional straight away. And people have good intentions, but it actually makes whoever their mate or their family member, colleague is feel alienated and like there's something wrong with them and not seen and heard and acknowledged. And like you've mentioned there with what you've done, the best thing you can do often is just put a hand on someone's shoulder or not even that, just be there and let them know that you're willing to listen.
Keep annoying them.
And then
that's what I say. I'm just going to keep annoying you.
Absolutely. that is it. And not just doing it once, but doing it over and over again and not pushing anything or expecting anything, but just being that ear there. Because we can get a lot out of speaking stuff out loud sometimes. Especially if you're spending a lot of time alone in the vineyard or out by yourself, there's a lot of thoughts going through your head and that can often start to not make all that much sense. And speaking it out loud to anyone, but preferably someone close to you, you can start to nut things out that perhaps you wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Stephen, we were talking before, and a very industry-specific problem, and that causes a lot of anxiety is grape contracts and whether they are then maintained. Do you think we're talking a lot about the impact on growers, but do you think that there are purchasers of grapes who aren't considering or factoring in enough the consequences of their decisions? I mean, it's one thing to say business is business, but business is also, to be done requires people to do business with.
Yeah, definitely.
Do they think enough about the consequences of some of those decisions?
We have 9 months where we're growing a product for them, and it's about one day in the vineyard, and it goes to the winery, and it's here or it's not there, and it certainly impacts. Where I suppose this last vintage we had about 50% of the grapes that weren't sold at January, and vintage we got them all picked and they all got a home. Some were, wasn't brilliant money, but it was cost recovery. I was sort of fairly happy where it finished up, but so there's others that are got nothing sold, and
we've all
and it's not necessarily the result of the grower. It's where you are at when your contract runs out and the luck of the draw with that. So
is there some benefit in advising some of those organisations on the flow-on effects of decisions they might make in an office?
Comes back to money. That's what it all comes back to.
Everything always comes down to money,
doesn't it?
But, is there some way that it could be pitched to some of the bigger purchasers of grapes that there is almost a social responsibility? No one's a charity.
Yeah, but they like to think there is, but when it comes back to it,
doesn't flow through.
It is business, and some of the smaller ones they do a little bit more, but then they have a lot more impact with the COVID too, where they were buying and then it's their dollars cash flows a lot less for them, and some of the bigger ones can absorb a little bit more. But so it's a very, very hard one to
but maybe something that could be considered, some advice that they could be given at at a corporate level, that this is what happens when you walk away from some of these contracts.
And it's just don't take it personally, and it's how it is. But
everyone takes things personally. You can't not.
It's a really interesting thought, Nick, and the UK are doing a lot of work with policy, with having wellbeing through all of their policies, and that would be lovely to see Australia taking more of that on board to look at what are the KPI, the policy guidelines, the human cost in making these decisions.
I'm sure there's GLOs out there, whatever, really don't like having to go and have those conversations. So there's a consequence for those people of decisions that are making.
2 years ago, one of the GLOs that come out there and told me, contract was nothing, not buying a couple 100 tonne of grapes from me, and he hated it more than me, and because you build those relationships.
So whether there's going to be some corporate responsibility.
And you still live with those people in the community.
Yeah.
So,
given that there are tough times now and looking towards the future, Beck? What do you see as the opportunity for wellbeing in the industry, and how regions might be able to look further into that and potentially implement things together that are going to help for years to come?
Yeah, I think obviously post-COVID, wellbeing has definitely risen to the forefront and top of mind, hopefully for most people, that it needs to be our number one focus. So certainly from a business perspective, according to Aon's global report, it's going to be, in the top 5 or top main focus for the next 5 years. So I'd like to see that across every organisation and business, and really, I guess, just understanding and maybe reprioritising some of those things that we put before our own health and well-being, and what else we can be doing. And I think you mentioned it before, Callum, too. It needs to be a shared responsibility. And that's a message that I'm trying to get across to organisations, that it's not just up to the employee, nor is it just up to the employer, but it's got to be a shared responsibility to create a healthy environment, but to also be turning up the best version of yourself.
How do you sell it?
Economic gain.
Yeah, how do you sell that, though, to get people to show up for something that might make them feel uncomfortable, that they might have a philosophy is peripheral and not that important? How do you get them to buy into it? And I think the bottom line is part of that.
Yeah, money.
Yeah. But for an organisation, most definitely. PwC did some work many years ago.
The organisation are working well. The organisation works well.
And I see it. So, in fact, I did a case study with one of my earlier clients where they were a small accounting practice. I had a practice or office in Glenelg and one in Port Pirie. We did a program. It was post-COVID. The managing director was experiencing burnout, and he got me involved in the business then. So we did a measurement, workshops, put in a wellbeing strategy for the organisation, and very quickly they saw a lift of about 30% in performance, and they could track that with lodgement, tax lodgement. So his team were operating, feeling better. 30% lift in productivity was amazing. But for the MD, this was his business, he was able to draw out 27 director hours out of the business. So he wasn't having to work in the business. He could take those hours back, 27 hours a week, and he was able to reapply those into growing. He grew 3 new businesses. So, I wish I'd had an agreement in place that I'd have a percentage of profits, but no, but they've been terrific to work with. And, I've just seen the difference that has made, and with the organisations that I'm working with, it's certainly a way to attract and retain great people. That's sort of top of mind for organisations these days. And it's just the right thing to do.
And with my PERMA, not course,
the survey
rather, that I've done, and that's one thing I found, that not enough time to do stuff. So it's how do I work out more time?
Yeah.
And then it comes back to economics again. Do you pay someone else to do something? It's good when the grape industry is good and there's money floating around.
Yeah.
So it's working out when you can do something and not do it, and timeliness and what you can get away without doing. So yeah.
What's your feeling of how up for this other businesses and owners are around the place? More of a focus on well-being, like if you were to over here down at the pub or whenever you're talking to people, how do they sort of speak about well-being and the idea of more of a focus on the mental health side of things?
Yeah, it's probably not getting any better, and there's people that just keep it under the carpet a bit more, and I suppose it's hopefully at the moment the grape industry is at the bottom, and there's a few positive signs with China back on. So I think but it's just keeping your eye on your friends and seeing where they're all going with it.
How does that culture start to change? Do you think it's possible for it too, or?
I suppose as generations come in, people then they start to talk more, but it's probably some of those older generations that never ever talked about anything.
Yeah, can't imagine your grandparents would have.
And if kids were in that environment, where they grew up and didn't talk about it, and it's probably now it becomes a lot more open, doesn't it? So.
I think one of the things with it though, Beck, which you would have noticed, is that it's never too late, despite how you've been raised or what you've seen growing up or what has or hasn't worked for you. Those people who might never have acknowledged it or spoken about it ever can still surprise you and come out later in life and then change the way they approach things, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely never too late to make any sort of change. And also, you may be thinking that you're tracking quite well too. But again, if you're not aware of those signs, early signs and symptoms, it can lead to burnout or to a mental illness if you don't keep that awareness level.
We're very good at deluding ourselves that
we get busy, don't we? We distract ourselves with so many other things. But really, it's about, I guess, carving out some time, finding some time in the day,
and not being afraid to talk about it.
You're right.
If it's with your partner or your friends, I
think maybe
if you've got a heart condition, people will say, "Oh, yeah, I've got a heart condition."
People
will be quite happy
and
to
people
talk
will
about
ask
that.
you about it as well.
Yeah, and I guess there's a responsibility.
If you say, I'm struggling with my mental health, then there'll be others that'll say, "Oh, yeah, well, I have the same problem." And
and particularly, looking at you and me, Stephen, probably the worst people, men of a certain age are probably the worst. Yeah,
it's a bit rude, wasn't it?
Are the worst people.
You got lumped in with
worst people. Yeah, sorry. But are the worst people at sharing that kind of information. And I think it's what really impressive that you're here today is, there is maybe a responsibility if you are a bit more comfortable in talking about it to again show that sort of community leadership in a way and go, look, I can do this. I can see that this is important, and maybe then others through that example can find themselves more open and more prepared to talk. If you can see someone else do it, I think that has huge impact.
That's how you can start changing culture now. I think even you coming on this show and talking about your own experience of it and helping your mate is instrumental in that. And when you do talk about it, you find that, other people have had a similar experience or can relate to you. And before we talk, we always think, it's just me, and that's why I can't say this. I've certainly found in everything I've done in mental health, anytime people start talking, all these other stories come out of the woodwork. And people always go, I can't believe this person I've known for so long has been through this and I had no idea.
And then you hear someone else that you know and close by or not close by that's suicided, and you think, well, if you can prevent something like that happening,
That's right. And talking and being proactive and thinking about some of this stuff more closely will stop people ending up in that crisis zone where it's very difficult to do anything once you're there.
Yeah. And I love that you shared about the fat farmers, things like that in the community, whether it's park run or fat farmers, it doesn't have a cost. It doesn't cost anything. No. It's around getting together with community and doing something that's, healthy and active and good for you. And hopefully on those walks, it does generate some discussions
and it's just
around wellbeing.
It's making the time to do it. But before this, I jumped on the bike this morning and went for a 3-hour ride, and I could have stayed and done something on the farm, but I find I need it.
You could have ridden down here instead of complaining about trying to get parking. Once you got down here, you could have just ridden the bike down and ridden back. So.
Nah, it's got to be dirt for me, not bitumen. No lycra.
No lycra, yeah, good. That's a wise thing.
Well, I think there's a lot of hope and optimism to be found in that. Your example of that, Steve, of people starting to do things differently and confront some of that stuff that's a bit more uncomfortable. And obviously, you really need it at a time like this in the regions with stuff being so tough in the industry. Like, that's not going to go away anytime soon. But what you can control is having those conversations and doing the tough thing on a day when you really don't feel like doing it, and being able to check in with yourself and perhaps some of that stuff that you might have rolled your eyes at in the past, understanding that you do need to do that. And if not for you, then for your family.
Rebecca, I think you might need to be taking some phone calls from other regional associations and things as well. I think it's really important work in it.
Yeah.
Done it in the Barossa, and I think, we all know that across the state, across the country, there's people in similar situations that could really
But I think it's the importance to run another workshop too, to keep that refreshed.
Well, the intention is hopefully to gain some more funding. So the valuation report just went in 2 weeks ago. So we're gunning for some more funding, because we know that the association, there's just not the money there either, and we know that the regions are hurting. And of course, I would love to work with any other especially associations in the wine industry.
Yeah.
Because Callum, what you said before, about it just triggered a memory. I mean, there is always going to be challenges going on, and at the moment it's China and there will always be. And, there's a great saying that the stress is going to kill you before the stressor will. So I think that you don't have any control necessarily over those stresses, but you do have control over how stress might affect you. So knowing, developing those tools and being aware of what those signs are, it's just the best thing that you can do for yourself.
It's certainly a worthy investment. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, government.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for coming on and sharing your range of experiences there. That's, I think, very promising what you started doing in the Barossa, and let's hope it gets adopted elsewhere and becomes something more normalised, because people could really use it.
Yeah, fingers crossed, hey?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
very much.
Thanks for listening. Head to the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website for links and further resources. This is part of a bigger conversation, so feel free to share this podcast with your mates and look after yourselves. Cheers.